They called the Chinese herbalist a poison seller. She called him the man who saved her mother. The sign on his shop said Chen Li, herbs and remedies in English and in Chinese characters, that the people of Dalton, Idaho Territory, could not read and did not try to read, because trying would have been a form of engagement, and engagement with Chen Li was not something the people of Dalton practiced. They practiced avoidance. They practiced the particular avoidance of small western towns toward Chinese residents, which was not the violent avoidance of the railroad camps or the mining towns. It was the quieter, colder avoidance of people who have decided that a person does not belong, and who enforce the not belonging through silence and through the refusal to see, which is a form of violence that leaves no bruises, but which is as effective as any blow, because a person who is not seen is a person who does not exist, and not existing is the loneliest form of punishment. Chen Li was 51 years old. He had come to Idaho Territory from San Francisco in 1879, and before San Francisco he had come from Guangdong Province, and before Guangdong Province he had been a student of herbal medicine under a physician named Huang, who had practiced for 40 years, and who had taught Chen Li the pharmacopoeia of traditional Chinese medicine, the 600 herbs and roots and minerals and preparations that constitute a medical system older than the town of Dalton by approximately 4,000 years, a fact that did not matter to the people of Dalton, because age and legitimacy are not the same thing in a culture that measures legitimacy by familiarity, and Chinese medicine was not familiar. He had opened his shop in Dalton because Dalton needed a healer. The town had no doctor. The nearest doctor was in Boise, 2 days' ride, and the distance between Dalton and Boise was the distance between illness and treatment, which was often the distance between life and death, and Chen Li had come to Dalton to close that distance. And the closing had been partial. Partial because the people who came to his shop came reluctantly, came at night, came when the illness was so severe that pride could no longer compete with pain, and the coming reluctantly was the compromise the town had made with itself. We will not acknowledge him, but we will use him, and the using without acknowledging is the arrangement, and the arrangement is sufficient. The word poison seller had been spoken by a man named Crabtree, who owned the mercantile and who had the particular authority of a man who controls the supply of goods in a town that has no other source of goods, and the authority of a merchant in a small town is not earned but structural. It exists because the merchant exists, and the merchant's opinion becomes the town's opinion, the way a river's current becomes the direction of everything in it. Not because the current is right, but because the current is strong. Crabtree had called Chen Li a poison seller in April, after Crabtree's nephew had taken an herbal preparation for a stomach complaint, and the preparation had caused a purging that was unpleasant but curative, and the unpleasantness had become, in Crabtree's telling, evidence of poison rather than evidence of medicine. And the telling had spread the way all tellings spread in small towns, quickly, completely, without correction, because correction requires someone willing to stand against the current, and standing against the current in Dalton, Idaho Territory required a kind of courage that was not common. Opal Fenton had that courage. Opal Fenton was 30 years old, and she was the daughter of Margaret Fenton, who had been sick for 6 months with a cough that would not stop, and a weakness that deepened every week. And the sickness was consumption, not the romantic consumption of novels, which involves pale heroines and fainting spells, and the tragic beauty of decline, but the real consumption of the frontier, which involves blood and exhaustion, and the slow suffocation of a person who cannot breathe, and the not breathing was killing Margaret Fenton by inches, and the inches were running out. Opal had tried everything the town could offer. She had tried the patent medicines from Crabtree's mercantile, the tonics and elixirs that promised cures, and delivered nothing except alcohol and sugar, and the particular cruelty of false hope, which is crueler than no hope, because false hope requires the person to believe, and the believing uses energy that the person cannot spare. She had tried prayer, which was sincere, and which she continued, but which had not stopped the cough. She had tried rest and fresh air, and beef broth, and every remedy that the women of Dalton had suggested, and the remedies had not worked, because the remedies were not medicine. They were tradition, and tradition is comforting, but it is not curative, and Margaret Fenton needed a cure. She went to Chen Li on a Tuesday evening in May. She went after dark because going after dark was the practice. The practice of people who used Chen Li's services without acknowledging his existence. The nighttime compromise between need and prejudice. She went through the back door of his shop, which was the door the townspeople used, because the front door was visible from the street, and visibility was the thing the townspeople avoided. Chen Li was at his workbench. The workbench was covered with jars and bottles and paper packets, each labeled in Chinese characters, and the labels were precise, and the arrangement was orderly, and the ordering was the evidence of a system, a medical system, that had categories and dosages and interactions and contraindications. A system as complex and rigorous as any Western medical system, and the complexity was invisible to the people of Dalton, because the complexity was written in characters they could not read, and the not reading was their limitation, not his. Opal told him about her mother. She told him about the cough and the blood and the weakness and the 6 months, and the patent medicines and the prayers and the beef broth, and she told him without apology for coming, and without pretense about coming through the back door, because Opal Fenton was a woman who dealt in facts, and the facts were, her mother was dying, and the town had nothing to offer, and Chen Li might have something, and the might was enough to bring her through the back door on a Tuesday evening in May. Chen Li listened. He listened the way physicians listen, not just to the words but to the spaces between the words, because the spaces tell the physician what the patient is not saying, and what the patient is not saying is often more diagnostic than what the patient is saying. He asked questions. How long? How much blood? What color? When is the cough worst? What does the sputum look like? And the questions were specific and clinical, and the specificity was the mark of a person who knows what he is looking for, and knowing what you are looking for is the difference between a healer and a guesser. He prepared a formula. The formula contained astragalus and ophiopagon and fritillaria and licorice root and 6 other ingredients that Opal could not pronounce and did not need to pronounce, because pronunciation is not relevant to efficacy, and efficacy was the only thing that mattered. He gave her instructions, how to prepare the tea, how often to administer it, what to watch for, what to expect, and the instructions were detailed and careful, and delivered in English that was accented but precise. The precision of a man who has learned a second language by necessity, and who respects the language enough to use it accurately. Margaret improved. The improvement was not immediate. The formula worked slowly, the way all real medicine works slowly, because real medicine does not perform miracles. It supports the body's own capacity to heal, and the body's capacity to heal takes time, and time is the ingredient that patent medicines promise to eliminate and cannot. Over 3 weeks, the cough diminished. Over 5 weeks, the blood stopped. Over 8 weeks, Margaret Fenton was sitting on her porch in the morning sun, breathing without pain. The breathing a miracle, that was not a miracle, but a result. The result of 600 years of accumulated knowledge, contained in jars labeled in characters the town could not read. Opal went back to Chen Li. She went through the front door. She went through the front door in daylight, in the morning, when the street was busy and the mercantile was open and Crabtree was standing at his counter, and the going through the front door was the statement, and the statement was, I will not use the back door anymore, because the back door is the door of shame, and there is no shame in medicine, and there is no shame in healing, and there is no shame in a man who saved my mother's life, and the saving is the fact, and the fact is stronger than Crabtree's opinion, and stronger than the current. Crabtree saw. The town saw. Opal Fenton walked into the Chinese herbalist shop through the front door at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, and she stood at the counter, and she paid for the formula that had saved her mother's life. And the paying was public, and the public paying was the first time anyone in Dalton had treated Chen Li's shop the way they treated every other shop in town, as a place of business. A place where a person goes through the front door and pays for a service, and the paying is ordinary. And ordinary was the revolution, because the revolution was not dramatic. The revolution was a woman walking through a door. The talk started within the hour. Crabtree told the barber that Opal Fenton had lost her mind. The barber told the blacksmith. The blacksmith told his wife, who told the minister's wife, who told the minister, and the minister, a man named Pruitt who had been in Dalton for 11 years, and who had buried more of his congregation than he had married, came to see Opal that afternoon. He came to her porch. He sat in the chair Margaret had been sitting in that morning. Margaret, who was inside now, resting, breathing easily, alive because of the man Pruitt's congregation called a poison seller, and he said, carefully, the way ministers say things when they are trying to be kind, but are actually being cowardly. People are concerned. People are concerned that my mother is alive. People are concerned about the method. The method is medicine. The method has been practiced for 4,000 years. The method saved my mother when the patent medicines from Crabtree's shelf did nothing except make her vomit. If people are concerned about the method, they should be more concerned about the methods that failed, and the methods that failed are the methods Crabtree sells, and Crabtree is the one calling Chen Li a poison seller, and Crabtree's concern is not about poison. Crabtree's concern is about commerce, because every patient who walks through Chen Li's front door is a customer who does not buy Crabtree's tonics, and that is the concern, and the concern is not medical, it is mercantile. Pruitt left. He left because Opal's logic was airtight, and airtight logic is difficult to argue with, especially when the argument is being made by a woman whose mother is breathing on the porch because of the medicine the argument is trying to discredit. She came back. She came back every week, to buy herbs for her mother's continuing treatment, to ask questions about the preparations, to learn the names she could not pronounce. She learned them. She learned astragalus and ophiopogon and fritillaria, and the learning was the bridge, because language is the bridge between cultures, and bridges require someone willing to cross, and Opal Fenton was willing. Chen Li taught her. He taught her not because she asked, but because she learned. And the difference between asking and learning is the difference between a student who wants credit and a student who wants knowledge. And Opal wanted knowledge because knowledge was the thing that had saved her mother, and knowledge that saves is knowledge worth acquiring. And the acquiring was the relationship, teacher and student, healer and apprentice. And the apprenticeship was the thing that changed the arrangement, because the arrangement had been, use him but do not see him, and Opal's apprenticeship was the seeing, and the seeing changed everything. The evenings in the shop became a ritual. After the last customer left, and there were more customers now, coming through the front door, coming in daylight, the daylight a consequence of Opal's door walking, Chen Li and Opal would sit at the workbench, and he would show her the formulas. He showed her the way Huang had shown him, not by lecture, but by preparation. Hands in the herbs, the fingers learning what the mind could not learn from words alone. The smell of dried roots and flowers filled the shop like a second language, and the language was being spoken between them, and the speaking was intimate in the way that all shared knowledge is intimate. Not the intimacy of bodies, but the intimacy of minds, working together on a problem that matters. And the problem that mattered was healing. And healing is the oldest problem and the most important. And working on the most important problem with another person is a bond that does not require naming, because the bond is self-evident. She noticed his hands. She noticed them the way she had noticed the jars, with attention that deepened over time. His hands were precise and gentle, the hands of a man who had spent 30 years handling delicate things. And the gentleness was not weakness. The gentleness was skill. And skill, expressed as gentleness, is the highest form of competence. And Opal Fenton, who had spent her life in a town that measured competence by loudness and force, recognized in Chen Li's hands a different measure, and the different measure was better. He noticed her courage. He noticed it the way he noticed everything, quietly, without announcement, the observation stored and considered and valued. The front door had been closed to him for 6 years. Opal had opened it in a single Wednesday morning, and the opening had cost her the town's easy approval, cost her Crabtree's willingness to extend credit at the mercantile, cost her the particular comfort of conformity, which is the comfort of belonging to a group even when the group is wrong. She had paid the cost without hesitation, because the cost was small compared to the value, and the value was her mother's life. And a mother's life measured against a town's approval is no contest at all. The town adjusted. The adjusting was slow, slower than the medicine, slower than the learning, slower than the crossing of the bridge. But the adjusting happened, because adjustment happens when the evidence accumulates to a point where denial requires more effort than acceptance. And Margaret Fenton, sitting on her porch, breathing without pain, was evidence, and evidence spoken by a living woman is louder than opinion spoken by a merchant. Crabtree did not adjust. Crabtree maintained his position because maintaining a position is easier than admitting error, and admitting error requires the humility that Crabtree did not possess, and the not possessing was his loss, not Chen Li's. Chen Li and Opal stood in the shop one evening in August, the jars arranged around them like a library, written in a language Opal was learning to read. The light came through the front window, not the back window, and the light was the light of a shop that was no longer hidden. And the not hiding was Opal's gift to Chen Li. And the gift was not charity. The gift was justice. And justice is what a person gives when they refuse to let the current carry them, and choose instead to stand.